I don't think there was anybody ever in history like King Solomon. I mean, for one thing, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Or as my daughter used to say, 300 porcupines? Who would want 300 porcupines? I was just glad she heard it that way, right?
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
I'm going to be carrying on in the series I began a few weeks ago called Pursuing Your Potential. Week 1 was the Peter Principle, and I suggested that most of us are living below our potential, and when we find Christ, we're now beginning to engage our potential. Week 2 was Living Beyond Your Limits, and that we don't really have limits in this world, because once you reach your limit, if you can push through it, then the limit has to move. And then last week, we talked about living beyond your imagination. And the scripture says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than you can ask or imagine. Well, this week, we're going to talk about the passion paradox. And so we'll get to what that means, a passion paradox. But I don't think any message on potential would be complete without talking about passion, because passion is arguably one of the most powerful forces in the entire universe. Passion is what I refer to as the fuel for life, and it's what moves us along. Regardless of your potential, it's passion that fuels that. And I want you to imagine your potential this way. Your potential is like an 800 horsepower sports car sitting in your driveway, ready to blow the doors off your neighbor's Toyota Prius. That's your potential, right? Like this one right here, we have it. It's the brand new Ferrari 812 Superfast. It's actually called the Superfast. 812 is 800 horsepower out of 12 cylinders. It does 330 kilometers an hour and costs $330,000. So if anyone has some, ideas, I have this on my wish list for Christmas. But here's the thing, even though it does 330 kilometers an hour, it won't go anywhere without fuel. And it takes a lot of fuel because it only gets 13 miles to the gallon. And that's what your potential is all about. You have this immense potential. Imagine yourself like the Ferrari. That's how God has made you. But you need fuel. You need passion. The thing about the Ferrari is you can always recognize them on the street because they're almost always red and they have the little horse. Here's a picture of one I saw just the other day going by. Don't imagine your potential like this. So we're going to look at potential today and the potential in passion. And I'm calling it the passion paradox, and I'll tell you why. Passion is a paradox because you cannot pursue your potential without passion, and yet it is passion or your passions that sometimes stand in the way of your potential. Now, we'll figure that all as we go along, but I want you to go with me. I'm in Genesis chapter 11. We're going to look at the story of the building of the Tower of Babel. It's all about human potential. And we're going to pick it up, Genesis chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass that they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come and let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the earth. Now the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they purpose to do will be withheld from them. Did you catch that last thing? So they were all together. They had this idea. They had this passion. Let me tell you something. This passion they had nothing to do with God, did it? They were building a city on their own, and they were going to build a tower to heavens, and they didn't care whether God could get them to heaven or how that would happen. They were going to build their own tower to heaven. And so he says, he didn't say they might be able to do this. He said, because they have purposed in their heart to do this thing, because they have a passion, they will not be stopped. And he said, nothing that they purpose to do will be withheld. That's the power of human potential. Now, I would argue with this because God wasn't keen on what they were doing because they were trying to get to heaven without him. And I would argue this, that he didn't actually stop them. Now we know that he confused their language and scattered them abroad over the face of the earth, but did he actually stop them? Or did he just slow them down? See, I think for the history of mankind, we've been building towers to heaven. Look at this graph up on the screen here. Look at these towers over the last 1,000 years or so. Look at the latest one in Dubai. It's 1,200 meters in the sky. It completely dwarfs the Empire State Building, of not that many years ago. And so we see that man is continually striving, is continually trying to move forward. And see, that is the power of passion. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the passion paradox. And I'm going to give you three things. I'm going to throw them up on the screen. Here they are. Here's the passion paradox. Number one, all passions are powerful. Number two, not all passions are helpful. And number three, all true passions are purposeful. So let's begin with the fact that it doesn't matter what your passion is, all passions are powerful. Passion has this way of fueling us, motivating us to move into whatever it is we're focused on, whatever our desire in life is. Passion is defined as an intense and compelling and overwhelming sense of desire for something. And we all have passions. We're going to discover that today. There's nobody without some sort of passion or another. But here's what I want you to think about. Because when we look at how people accomplish things in this life, why is it that some soar to ridiculous heights in life and others wallow in abject mediocrity? I mean, we all have the same size brain, more or less. You know that. God created us more or less equal. We have this brain there, more or less the same size, more or less the same basic intelligence. We all for sure have the same amount of time. 24 hours a day, every single one of us. Most of us put our pants on one leg at a time. We're just human. And yet some excel and others don't. And of course, the big factor, the big difference, the singularity, the thing that distinguishes those who excel from those who don't is this thing called passion. See, so let me ask you a couple of questions about this. I mean, Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, is Warren Buffett 10,000 times smarter than you because he's 10,000 times richer than you? I don't think so. I don't think that math works. How about Vin Diesel, one of the greatest actors of our time? Is he 10,000 times more talented than you because he has 35 motion pictures to his name? I don't think so. Have you seen him in Guardians of the Galaxy? He played a tree stump. And in that role, he had 3 words, one line, 3 words. It wasn't even 3 words. It was 3 syllables. Do you remember? I am Groot. I am Groot. Everybody say with me, I am Groot. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You just graduated from the Vin Diesel acting school. You are now as good an actor as he is. Good luck with your career. And so you look at people and you think they're not that much more talented. They're not that much more gifted to us. And so here's where I want to go with this. I could keep making fun of people, but let me go here with this. When we look at those people that have really excelled, those that are highly successful, what is the one thing they all have in common? And the one thing they all have in common is this driving passion, this singular, obsessive passion for their pursuit in life. When you look at the sports legends of our time, and there's many names, but I'll throw out 3 that you would all recognize and will be recognized for generations to come, and that's Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, and Tiger Woods. I mean, these names are going to go down in history, and I would argue with you that they were not necessarily the most naturally gifted in their sports, even though they excelled at the top of their field. And the one thing that they all shared was a passion that surpassed their peers and their contemporaries. I mean, all you have to do is look at Tiger Woods. He's a great example on this, because Tiger Woods, his training regimen was more than any golfer in the history of the world. He trained 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. He went to the gym and he went running, he went golfing, of course. He went onto the driving range. I mean, this guy just lived and breathed and thought about nothing else but golf. And of course, he rose to the top of his game. And when he came into the tour, probably one of the best golfers at the time was a man by the name of John Daly. John Daly had won 18 PGA tours and was this great golfer. And so Tiger Woods comes in and he just rapidly surpassed him. And all you have to do and it's a little cruel, but I'm going to do it anyway. All you have to do is look at these two men side by side to decide who's going to have more potential. So you look at these two guys. There's Tiger Woods on the right, the guy who spends the time in the gym. And there is John Daly. That is a cigarette in his hand. He was a chain smoker, and he walked down the course with that cigarette all the time. We look at this next picture. He's on the course with a beer in his hand. I mean, you look at that, and you think, that looks like my cousin Harley, who just like had his third heart attack. And you might argue that John Daly was more naturally gifted than Tiger Woods, but Tiger Woods eclipsed his record with 80 wins, not 18, and went on to be really seriously one of the greatest golfers of all time because he was so singularly passionate and focused on his sport. Regardless of what your passion is, all passions are powerful. But here's the second point. Not all passions are helpful. And I want to show you a little verse here from the words of the Apostle Paul, and it's Galatians chapter 5, it's verse 16, and this is what it says. Then I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things you wish. Now, this is not complicated, but it is a little bit confusing because it talks about the lusts of the flesh, but then it implies that there are the lusts of the Spirit, which doesn't make sense to us. And if we substitute a different word, and if we use the word passion instead of lust, which is almost the same word, it all makes sense. Because there are the passions of the flesh, which we all know about, those sinful passions. And then there are the passions of the Spirit. And what he says is you have these two contrary things. They are contrary to one another. And he says, if you fall into the passions of the flesh, you will do things that you do not wish to do. You know that's true. With anybody you know that has an addiction in their life, they might want to quit that thing, but they can't because there is a passion of the flesh that has gripped them and has taken over them and controlled them. And we know all about these things, sexual passions that drive people, and the passion for greed, and the passion for food, which we've all suffered to and succumbed to once in a while. You have all been to that party or to that buffet where you had no intention of eating so much, but you did anyway. And you thought to yourself, why did I see? How many of you have been there? How many of you know what I'm talking about? And you thought, why did I eat so much? I didn't want to eat that much, but I ate that much. I can't believe I ate the whole thing. That's the Alka-Seltzer commercial from 25 years ago, in case you're wondering what that was. And we've all done that. We've all succumbed to that, and we've done those things that we did not wish. So we could talk about the sinful passions, and I think that's a whole sermon for another day. But I want to talk today about the unhelpful passions, because there are passions that aren't necessarily sinful, but they're not necessarily helpful either. And every single one of us has some of these passions, these things in our life that are not bad things, but they're not helpful things for us pursuing our potential. And so I'll give you an example, and one of them is King Solomon. I don't think there was anybody ever in history like King Solomon. I mean, for one thing, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Or as my daughter used to say, 300 porcupines? Who would want 300 porcupines? I was just glad she heard it that way, right? But my question is, who would want 700 wives? Who'd want 700 mothers-in-laws? Who would want 700 anniversaries? How do you remember all those anniversaries? How do you even remember your wives' names? How would you manage to juggle? That's 2 a day. How do you juggle all these women? And how many of them had the same name? How confusing would that be? I mean, how would you get through life? When would you ever sleep? When would you ever rest? When would you regain your strength? How would you ever go to work? You wouldn't be able to do anything else. And yet, Solomon went on to accomplish more than almost anybody else in history. He was the most accomplished king in history. Not only, and the Bible lists all the things he did. Not only did he have all those women, 1,000 of them, but he built the temple in Jerusalem, the incredible temple in Jerusalem. But then it says he built palaces and homes for himself. And he built gardens, and he built pools, and he had servants and men servants. And he built stables for his horses. And he had 12,000 horses. And he had 1,400 chariots. That's more cars than Jay Leno owns. You know that, don't you? And I mean, the list went on and on and on, the things that he accomplished. And then the Queen of Sheba came to visit him. And she had come from her wealthy kingdom in Ethiopia, and she came, and when she saw all that King Solomon had accomplished, this is what she said. It said, it took her breath away she had never seen anything like it. And so King Solomon was easily the world's most passionate man and easily the most accomplished man in this world. But when he goes through all of these things, we see what he says about it in the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe one of his most honest books. He gets there towards the end of his life and he's looking back and he's listing all of his accomplishments, some of which I just said to you. And then he begins to regret some of the things he did, and he becomes introspective and he wonders, was this really helpful? Was this really purposeful? Was there eternal value in this? And I'm going to read you the words of Solomon. This is what he said about his life when he looked back at it. It's Ecclesiastes 2, verse 11. Then I looked at all the works of my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. And then a little further on down in the passage, he says, how do I know if the man I leave it to will be a fool? And he looks at everything he's done and all these accomplishments and all this passion that drove him all these years. And he looks at it and he says, was it worth it? Or was it all vanity and grasping for the wind? Because maybe none of this has really eternal value. And how do I know whether the one I leave it to will be a fool? Let me ask you a question. Was the one he left it to a fool? Yeah, it was his son Rehoboam, and he squandered the whole thing. And so that's exactly what happened. And see, we need to relate to King Solomon, and we need to look at our lives and be introspective once in a while and look at the things we consume our time and energy on. We need to ask ourselves this question. Is it being well spent? Is this something that is purposeful for us? Is it helpful? Tell you a little story about this. I had a neighbor, his name was Tony. Tony was a great guy. And Tony was a baker, got up at 4 in the morning, went out baking at wherever he worked. And he'd be home by 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And his real passion in life was not baking, it was gardening. And he was a fantastic gardener. I mean, his front yard looked like a golf green. His backyard was basically a botanical garden with every kind of flower and shrub and vegetable and grapevines growing. And I'd walk through it and he'd point out all these plants I'd never even heard of, never even seen before. He was an extraordinary gardener. He came home at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He worked all afternoon in the hot sun. And then at dusk, he would get a glass of red wine and he would sit under the shade of his tree and he would look at the works of his hand. And it was kind of a neat thing to see somebody so passionate about gardening. But then what happened was Tony got too old to take care of his garden. And so he put the house up for sale and he moved. And the person who bought his house didn't quite have the same passion for gardening that Tony did. In fact, he didn't own a lawnmower. And the first year, the grass in the front yard was waving like this, like fields of wheat full of dandelions and thistles and all kinds of stuff. And the backyard, which was entirely a garden before, just turned into a big patch of weeds. 5 years later, that backyard, you could not walk from one fence to the other. There is ragweeds 6 feet tall all summer long. It's just a disaster. And then about a couple of years ago, 3 years after Tony sold the house, I saw him drive by in his car, I recognized his car. And he stopped right in front of the house and he just sat there looking at that garden. And I couldn't see him from my vantage point, but I imagined a tear running down his cheek. What do you think? Because who knows whether the man you leave it to will be a fool. And see, this is what happens with us sometimes. We have to ask ourselves the question, nothing wrong with gardening. Don't miss my point in this. My point is, how much time and energy are we going to put into things that actually don't have any true lasting value? And how much time are we going to put into those things that actually do? And you know, when you talk to people today and you ask them, how are things? They always say the same thing. What is it? Busy. They're all busy. Have you noticed people are busy? I bet you, even today, you've already told someone you're busy. You know what? That doesn't mean anything. Guess what? Everybody's busy. You're busy? So am I. Everybody's busy. Do you know anybody that's not busy? We live in a busy world. How are you? Busy. How are you? Busy. Well, that was a fun conversation. We're all busy. Well, let's talk about who's busier than who. Because I'm busier than you. I got more to do than you. No, we're all busy. The big question is, busy doing what? And when people tell me, you know, we ask them to do something for the church, they say, oh, I would, Pastor Mark, I just don't have time. Really? You don't have time? See, I happen to know that the fishermen get up at 4 a.m. to go fishing. I happen to know that the golfers get up at 6 a.m. to go golfing. I happen to know that the computer gamers are still up at 6 or 4 from the night before because they lost all track of time. I look at the malls and they're full of people that love shopping. I look at the gyms and they're full of people that love working out. I look at the restaurants and they're full of people with a passion for food. And the list goes on and on and on and on. People have time for their passions. And if you have time for something, you will always if you have a passion for something, you'll always make time for it. That's just the reality. So don't tell people you don't have time. Tell them the truth. You don't have a passion for that. That's what you're really saying. So here's where I'm going with this. See, all passions are powerful. Not all passions are helpful. Probably by this point, you've all got the idea that you have unhelpful passions in your life. And when you say you don't have time, what you're really saying is you don't have a passion. So the last and the final thing is this. All true passions are purposeful. And see, purpose and passion are so important to each other. I would put it this way, that the formula for potential is potential equals passion plus purpose. And if you can discover your purpose or discover your passion, whichever first, and then get the two of them to work together like this, I'm telling you what, you have the winning formula. And what happens is so often our passions work against us because we have passions that don't lead us towards our purpose. And if we can discover our purpose and move our passions into that, or vice versa, if we can bring those two things together, then it is a game changer. And when we look into Scripture, we see people whose passions actually changed. And I'll give you an example. One of them is the Apostle Paul. Before he was the Apostle Paul, before he met Christ, he actually had a passion. Anybody remember what it was? Killing Christians. That's what everybody needs a hobby, right? And he just loved killing Christians. You say, what do you mean that was his passion? He told us that. Philippians chapter 3. He said, concerning zeal or passion, concerning passion, persecuting the church. Nobody had more zeal and passion for killing Christians than I did. And then we see this man transformed after he meets Christ on the road to Damascus. And all of a sudden, he becomes a singularly focused missionary. And he's willing to endure everything. He talks about it. He talks about all the things he faced, being beaten and being flogged and being stoned and being shipwrecked and being naked and hungry and imprisoned. And eventually, he was beheaded. What was it? What was it that motivated this man to face all those things and never back down? Well, he tells us. It's Romans chapter 10, verse 1. He says, my heart's desire, or my heart's passion, is for all Israel to be saved. He had a passion for souls that literally consumed him. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand this, that you have to maybe quit your job and develop some sort of crazy passion and go as a missionary somewhere in the world. This is what the Scripture says. How would your passion change? How would you discover your purposeful passion? And it's Psalm 37, verse 4, and you all know it. And you can finish it for me. It goes like this. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. You all know that verse. He will give you the desires of your heart. But so many people misinterpret it, and they read it like this. Delight yourself in the Lord, and whatever your little heart desires, He's going to give you. Nuh-uh-uh. That's not what that means. It says, delight yourself in the Lord, and the desires you have in your heart are the ones that He's going to put there. The passions that you have in your heart, He's going to give you His passions for your life and your purpose. And if you can get a hold of that, when you delight yourself in the Lord, I'm telling you, He's going to redirect your path, just like He did with Paul the Apostle and many others throughout Scripture. And so we delight ourselves in the heart, and He gives us these new passions. I want to give you a story about somebody in our church here. And he was the 11th of 13 children. And his father was a Chinese immigrant, ran a Chinese grocery in downtown Winnipeg, 13 kids. Out of 13 kids, every one of them went on to great heights. They were PhDs and engineers and businessmen. And this particular one, who's a part of our church, number 11, he's a doctor, not only a doctor, but a surgeon. He's got 2 specialties. And he told me that, I said, how did this happen? How does a Chinese grocer raise 13 superstars? And he said, well, my dad always told us this. He said, the key to life is that we live in the land of opportunity in Canada. And in Canada, if you put your mind to it, you can achieve anything you want in this life. And he also told them that you can't just do everything for yourself. You have to be thinking about other people in the midst of whatever you're pursuing. That was really good advice. So all these kids went on to excel. And so we were having dinner one night, and we were talking about his career, and he was telling us how many years he put into it. I mean, he spent 10 years just on his specialties. And I said, what motivated you to put in an extra 10 years to get 2 more specialties? I said, it was money, right? I'm messing with him. I said, it was money, right? He said, no. He says, I really don't care about money. He says, the only reason I do this, he says, is because I just want to help people. That's what the passion of my heart is. If I can help another human being in this world, that's what matters. And I just was so moved by that story. And if you think he was just blowing smoke, let me tell you something. He does surgery, starts at about 7 in the morning. He'll do surgery all day. He'll go home. He'll have dinner with his family. After dinner, he retires to his study where he phones every single one of those patients he operated on that day and asks them how they're doing. Does your doctor phone you at home? No. I know for a fact your doctor doesn't phone. No, doctors aren't phoning you at home. And you know what? He's just an extraordinary man who has figured this thing out, that it's about what we do for other people. That's what the greater purpose is always all about. When I was 18 years old, I went and lived in the mountains. I skied 110 days in a row. I never took a day off. And when I was growing up, all I wanted to do was be a ski racer. And that was the only thing that was important to me. I love skiing. I talked about skiing, me and my brothers, 12 months of the year. I read ski magazines 12 months of the year. I kept my skis in my bedroom. That's how important they were to me. When I was 16 years of age, I became the Manitoba champ in skiing, and I was so mad at my dad because he wouldn't send me to the mountains to live there to make the national team. What a grump, eh? Can you believe he wouldn't do that? And so that was my singular passion when I was growing up. Now, my mother had a different passion for me, by the way. We grew up Catholic. She wanted me to be an altar boy. And you know what an altar boy is. And I didn't want to be an altar boy because I knew what her plan was. If she'd get me in to be an altar boy, I mean, I was one step away from being a priest, basically, right? I mean, it's the next step is a priest. I thought, I'm not going to the priesthood. She says, no, I don't need a priest. I just want a little altar boy. I thought, I'm not being an altar boy because I know I'm right one step from the priesthood. And then what am I going to do? And I said, there's 3 things I don't like about it. Number 1, I don't want to work weekends. Number 2, that celibate life doesn't appeal to me. Number 3, I'll never be a famous sports star, right? And so I didn't become an altar boy. No way, no how I was going to do that. Well, let's just fast forward a little bit, because here we are. I'm in the ministry. I work weekends. But on the other hand, I am married and I am on TV and I'm famous, so 2 out of 3 ain't bad, I guess. Eh? But I want to tell you about how the passion changed for me, because I still love skiing. But my passion was so intense for skiing. I mean, if you can do something 110 days in a row, then you know you really love it. And for me, it was the anticipation of getting to the top of the hill. And when I went to the top of the hill, I'd be on that chairlift. How many of you ski, snowboard? You've been on a chairlift, so you know this feeling. And so, you know, people go up the chairlift, and they get to the top, and then they stand there and they talk about where they're going to have lunch and what run they're going to go down, and, you know, contemplate the beauty of nature, blah, blah, blah. And that's not what I do. I'm going up the chairlift, and I get that bar up, and I got my poles on like this, and the moment I'm out at the top, it's boom! And I'm going down the hill, and there's no way, no how you're going to catch me down that hill. Even my kids can't catch me. And away we go down the mountain. That's how I ski. And I go top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom. So that was my passion, my singular passion growing up. So now God's called me into the ministry. He's actually given me a new passion. I do work weekends. You do know that, don't you? And I sit right over in that chair over there, and when we're in the announcements, in the last song, I imagine that I'm sitting on the chairlift. And I'm ready to get out, and I'm ready, and I'm already pitched forward, and I'm on the edge of my seat, and I don't walk up these stairs. I run up these stairs because I can't wait to get to the top of the mountain and come down and preach the gospel to people, because God has given me a passion for His Word that is shut up in my bones, and to see people come to Christ. That's what matters in my life. And see, that's how God works in us. He takes our passions and He redeems them, and He focuses them on our purpose. And if you discover that, then nothing will be impossible for you. That is the passion paradox. And remember this, that if you delight yourself in the Lord, He will give you the passions of your heart.
The one question a person should ask is, what on earth am I doing here? In Pastor Mark's new book, A Greater Purpose, you will fully realize that we are all here for a divine purpose. This book will help you discover your own personal destiny. You can order a copy by visiting our website at churchoftherock.ca. Order a copy today and begin your journey to finding your place in God's great big space.